A young man married a 63-year-old woman, and when she became pregnant, the whole town was buzzing, trying to figure out their secret. When I first met Eleanor, it wasn't about her age. It was about the way she listened, really listened, with her head tilted just so, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, seeing right through the nervous 28-year-old man I was. I was a landscape architect, just starting my own small firm, and she'd hired me to redesign the gardens of her sprawling Pasadena estate. She was 61 then. She moved with a kind of timeless grace, her silver hair always perfectly styled, her voice a low melodic hum that could soothe a cornered animal. We'd spend hours walking through her rose bushes and under the shade of ancient oak trees, talking not about irrigation systems or soil acidity, but about art, about loss, about the strange and winding paths our lives had taken. I fell in love with her mind first, then with the whole of her. Our 29-year age gap was just a number, a piece of trivia for others to chew on. For us, it was irrelevant. We married a year later in a small ceremony in that very garden. My parents were hesitant. They were kind, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Her circle of friends, all wealthy and draped in quiet judgment, looked at me like I was a museum piece, or worse, a line item in her future will. We weathered it all. Our life was beautiful. We'd have breakfast on the sun-drenched patio, the air smelling of jasmine and fresh coffee. We'd travel, exploring little towns along the California coast. I'd never been happier. My business flourished, partly because her name opened doors I couldn't have knocked on myself. But I worked hard. I poured every ounce of myself into my designs, proving, mostly to myself, that I was more than just Eleanor's young husband. The whispers in our small, affluent community never fully died down, but they faded into background noise. We had built a fortress of genuine affection around ourselves. But there was one stone missing from that fortress, a topic we rarely touched. A child. I had always wanted to be a father, a dream I'd quietly packed away when I fell in love with a woman past her childbearing years. I never pressured her, never even brought it up. It was my private sacrifice for a public love. Then, one evening, about a year into our marriage, Eleanor, now 63, sat me down in the living room. The fireplace crackled, casting dancing shadows on her face. She took both my hands in hers. Her skin was cool, as always. "Alex," she began, her voice steady, but I could see a tremor in her hands. "I have something to tell you, something miraculous." My mind raced. Was she ill? Was it about her finances? "I'm pregnant," she said. The words hung in the air, seeming to warp the very fabric of the room. I just stared. Pregnant? It wasn't possible. It was a medical impossibility. I must have looked like a fish, my mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. She smiled, a radiant, confident smile. "I know it's shocking, darling. We've been seeing a specialist, a very private, very advanced clinic. It's a new hormonal therapy, highly experimental. They said the chances were less than 1%, but it worked." A wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me washed over. Disbelief, then confusion, then a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy. A miracle. Our miracle. I swept her up in my arms, tears streaming down my face, burying my face in her silver hair. All my quiet sacrifices, all my packed-away dreams were suddenly, impossibly coming true. We were going to have a family. The whispers in town went from a low hum to a deafening roar. Eleanor's pregnancy became the single biggest piece of gossip Pasadena had seen in decades. It was a spectacle. The first few months of her pregnancy were, from my perspective, idyllic. I was floating on a cloud of bliss. I'd talk to her belly. I'd read parenting books. I'd spend hours sketching out designs for the most beautiful nursery imaginable. Eleanor, for her part, seemed to glow. She was serene, happy. But beneath the surface of my joy, tiny, Insidious seeds of doubt began to sprout, watered by the relentless curiosity of the world around us. It started with small things. Our friends would ask gentle, probing questions. Which hospital are you using, Eleanor? We know a wonderful obstetrician at Huntington. Eleanor would smile vaguely and say, "Oh, it's all being handled by my private clinic. They have their own facilities, they're very exclusive." She was never seen going to a local doctor. Her appointments were always out of town, clandestine trips she'd take by herself. "They're very strict with their protocols, Alex," she'd explain. "No partners allowed during these early treatments. It's to minimize any external variables." It sounded plausible, scientific. I wanted to believe it, so I did. The town, however, was less convinced. I'd go to the grocery store for a pint of milk and feel a dozen pairs of eyes on me. I'd overhear snippets of conversation in the produce aisle. 63? Come on, Brenda, my niece had to do IVF at 35. I heard she's paying a fortune for some secret European doctor. The looks weren't always mean, they were just intensely curious, as if I were a zookeeper holding the secret to a panda's miraculous conception. It was isolating. I became fiercely protective of Eleanor. I'd glare at anyone who stared too long. I'd change the subject abruptly when people got too inquisitive. Our home, once our sanctuary, began to feel like a gilded cage, holding a secret the world was desperate to unlock. Eleanor seemed unfazed by it all. She'd glide through social functions, a hand resting on her stomach, which, to be fair, was beginning to show a small, delicate curve. She'd answer nosy questions with an enigmatic smile that gave nothing away. She was a master of deflection. The real doubt didn't start with the gossip, though. It started with a phone call. I came home early one afternoon, my last appointment canceled. I walked in quietly, wanting to surprise her. I heard her voice from the study, hushed and urgent. "You have to be taking the supplements. I don't care if they make you feel tired. It's not just about you anymore." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. She was probably talking to a nutritionist from the clinic. But then she said something that made the blood freeze in my veins. "The payment went through this morning. Just focus on staying healthy. I'll handle everything else." Payment? I knew the clinic was expensive. She'd mentioned a single upfront fee for the entire program, which she said she'd paid months ago. This sounded like an ongoing transaction. I opened the door gently. She was facing the window, her back to me. "I'll call you next week," she said, and quickly hung up. She turned, a small gasp escaping her lips when she saw me. "Alex, you're home early." She recovered instantly, her warm smile clicking into place. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just the clinic coordinator," she said breezily. "A bit of a worrywart. They monitor everything so closely." I nodded, but the explanation felt hollow. It didn't fit the tone of the conversation I'd overheard. A week later, I was looking for a postage stamp in her desk drawer, something I'd done 100 times before, and I found a bank statement that wasn't ours. It was from a different bank, one I didn't recognize. My eyes scanned the page, and one transaction leaped out. A wire transfer for $50,000. It was the second of 5 scheduled payments, according to the notes section. The recipient was an S. Miller. My heart hammered against my ribs. $50,000, the second of 5. That was $250,000. Who was S. Miller, and why were we paying them so much money in installments? That night, over dinner, I tried to ask. "Honey, I was looking for a stamp and saw a weird bank statement. Something about payments to an S. Miller." The fork in her hand stilled. For a split second, a flash of pure panic crossed her face, before it was replaced by a look of mild annoyance. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's for an art acquisition, a rather sensitive young artist who prefers to be paid through a trust. It's complicated. I should have used a different drawer for those files." It was so smooth, so plausible. Eleanor was a patron of the arts. She was always buying paintings and sculptures. But the name Miller felt familiar. I couldn't place it. I let it go, or rather, I tried to. But the name was a splinter in my mind, festering. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor's belly grew slowly but surely. She started wearing elegant maternity dresses. She looked every bit the part of a miraculously expectant mother, but our intimacy had changed. It was like living with a beautiful, fragile piece of glass. She seemed distant, her thoughts a million miles away. The phone calls in the study became more frequent. She started locking the door. "The stress, Alex," she'd say. "The doctor wants me in a completely peaceful environment." The secrecy was no longer about a medical procedure. It felt personal. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. I was working from my home office, and I heard the front door open and close. I assumed it was the housekeeper. About an hour later, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and saw a small brown leather purse sitting on the entryway table. It wasn't Eleanor's. Her purses were designer pieces, structured and expensive. This one was soft, worn, and unassuming. A little thrill of dread went through me. I knew I shouldn't. It was a violation of privacy, but I couldn't stop myself. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a wallet, and inside the wallet was a driver's license. The face on the license was that of a young woman, maybe late 20s, with tired eyes that looked eerily like Eleanor's. The name on the license was Sarah Miller. S. Miller. My breath hitched. Sarah Miller. Suddenly, I remembered. Eleanor had a daughter from her first marriage. A daughter she was estranged from. She rarely spoke of her, and when she did, it was with a sad finality. "Sarah and we just see the world too differently," she had told me once. She made some poor choices. We haven't spoken in years. Her maiden name was Miller. This was her daughter's purse. A wave of nausea hit me. I put the wallet back, my fingerprints feeling like they were burning into the cheap leather. I went back to my office and sat there, staring at the wall, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The secret trips, the payments, the hushed phone calls, the vague talk of a clinic. It wasn't a clinic she was visiting, it was Sarah. I knew what I had to do. The next day, I told Eleanor I needed to go to San Diego for a 2-day site visit with a new client. It was a lie, and it tasted like poison on my tongue, but I had to know the truth. Using a public records search online, I had found an address for Sarah Miller in a town called Ojai, a couple of hours north. A quiet, artsy community nestled in the mountains. The entire drive there, my stomach was in knots. The sunny California landscape passed by in a blur of green and gold, a stark contrast to the gray storm raging inside me. What if I was wrong? What if there was a reasonable explanation for all this? I would shatter the most beautiful thing in my life over a paranoid fantasy. But what if I was right? I found the address. It was a modest, slightly run-down apartment complex with fading paint and overgrown bougainvillea. It was a world away from our manicured Pasadena mansion. I parked across the street and just watched for a few minutes, my heart pounding. Finally, I got out, walked up the cracked concrete steps, and knocked on the door of apartment 2B. The door opened, and my fantasy, my last shred of hope, shattered into a million pieces. Standing there was the woman from the driver's license, Sarah Miller. She was young, with the same stormy eyes as her mother, and she was heavily pregnant. Her belly was large and round, far bigger than the delicate curve Eleanor had been cultivating under her silk blouses. We just stared at each other for a long moment. I didn't have to say a word. She saw the recognition, the dawning horror in my eyes, and she just crumpled. Her face dissolved into tears, and she leaned against the doorframe, one hand protectively on her stomach. "You're Alex," she whispered, her voice thick with shame. I knew this would happen. I told her it was a crazy plan. I stepped inside her small, cluttered living room. It smelled of toast and laundry detergent. It was real. It was heartbreakingly real. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice barely a whisper. And she did. She told me how her mother had approached her 6 months ago. Sarah had lost her job, was in deep financial trouble, and was desperate. Eleanor had come to her not as a mother, but as a strategist with a business proposal. She wanted a legacy with me, a child that was biologically mine. IVF was the answer. My sperm, a donor egg, and a surrogate. And she wanted her own daughter to be that surrogate. The price was $250,000, paid in installments. The plan was for Sarah to hand the baby over the moment it was born, sign away all her rights, and disappear. Eleanor would fake a premature birth on one of her trips and bring the baby, our baby, home. She was wearing a prosthetic pregnancy belly. The whole thing was a lie, a perfectly crafted, beautifully executed, monstrous lie. The drive back to Pasadena was a study in numbness. I couldn't feel the steering wheel in my hands. I couldn't feel the tears tracking down my face. I was an empty shell. When I walked through the front door, Eleanor was arranging flowers in the hall. She looked up, her face a mask of simulated pregnancy glow. "Darling, you're back a day early. How was San Diego?" She came towards me, arms open for a hug. I held up a hand to stop her. "I went to Ojai, Eleanor," I said. The name just hung there. The color drained from her face. The flowers in her hand trembled. I met Sarah. We stood in that grand, silent foyer for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she dropped the flowers and her composure broke, but not in the way I expected. There was no remorse. There was no apology. There was only furious, defiant justification. "I did it for you, for us," she cried, her voice high and sharp. "I gave you the one thing I couldn't. A child. Your child. I moved heaven and earth to give you your dream. Is that so wrong?" The sheer audacity of it, the twisted logic, took my breath away, and in her frantic defense, she revealed one last, brutal twist. To get the initial funds for the clinic fee and the first payment to Sarah, she'd sold a small parcel of land in Northern California. "You never used it. It was just sitting there," she said. That land hadn't been hers to sell. It was a piece of property my late grandfather had left specifically to me in his will, held in a trust that she, as my wife, had been made the manager of. She hadn't just orchestrated a baby. She had sold a piece of my past, a gift from my grandfather, to finance the lie. I left that night. I packed a single bag, walked out of that beautiful house, and never looked back. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and painful phone calls. I filed for divorce. The town that had buzzed about our miracle pregnancy was now feasting on the scandal of our implosion. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care what they thought. I had a more important reality to deal with. I stayed in contact with Sarah. Our conversations were awkward, strained. We were two strangers bound together by a bizarre, painful secret and the impending birth of my child. I made it clear to her that the money Eleanor had given her was hers to keep, a chance to start over. I wouldn't let her child, my child, be the reason for her ruin. I found a small two-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of the city. It was empty and echoed with my footsteps, a stark contrast to the opulent silence of Eleanor's mansion. But it was honest. It was mine. 2 months later, my son, Leo, was born. I was there in the hospital room. I was the first one to hold him. Looking down at his tiny wrinkled face, his shock of dark hair, I felt a love so pure and so overwhelming it eclipsed all the betrayal and the lies. Sarah and I worked out a co-parenting agreement. It's not a storybook romance. It's something quieter, more complicated. It's a partnership built from the rubble of a colossal deception. Sometimes I'll be in my small apartment, assembling a piece of baby furniture, the instructions spread out on the floor, and I'll think about Eleanor. I don't feel anger anymore, just a profound sadness for a woman so terrified of losing love that she tried to purchase it, to manufacture it like one of her art pieces. She had built a beautiful frame, but had forgotten that a family needs a real picture inside, not just a convincing forgery. Holding my son, I know I have that now. It's not the life I ever imagined, but it's real, and it's mine.